Well, here's where things currently stand in Congress. Republicans have a majority in both the House and the Senate. Democrats need to pick up 23 seats to take control of the House. As Nathan pointed out, U.S. television networks are projecting they are likely on their way to that goal. Now, they would need to pick up 2 more seats in the Senate to win a majority there. That looks increasingly less likely as the night progresses. Now, there are some key state-level races attracting attention in the United States. In Georgia, history will be made if Democrat Stacey Abrams wins her race. If she defeats Republican Brian Kemp, Abrams will become the first black female governor in the United States. It's a close race. In a traditional Republican stronghold, that one is too close to call at this stage. In Florida, Andrew Gillum is trying to become the state's first African-American governor. He's the mayor of Florida's capital, Tallahassee. He's up against Ron DeSantis, a Republican and former congressman. Right now, that one also too close to call. Very close race indeed. With me here in the studio, Atiba Madyun. He's president and founder of Party Politics US. Let's start there. I mean, Georgia, the lines hours long for people wanting to vote. They had to keep the polls open late. I think the same in Florida. Very, very close races. Give me your sense of what you're seeing in Georgia and also in Florida. It's also a very close Senate race as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to start off by saying social media is amazing because I'll tell you that the things that we've been seeing with Stacey Abrams, with Andrew Gillum, and how they have activated and been able to get not just celebrities, elected officials, but people on the ground who are excited, who are ready to vote, who are early voting. I mean, we've seen the numbers right now in terms of turnout has been off the chain. I mean, it's just something that we haven't seen in the last few election cycles. So the excitement, I think, you know, it may have something to do with the fact that there are 2 African Americans that are on the ballot, both in Georgia and Florida. But I also think that a lot of it has to do with the rhetoric and people who really wanted to see, unfortunately, as Nathan mentioned, that there's this blue ripple and maybe not this blue wave. But I think that the excitement that we see is indicative of the feeling of the country and that people want to push back on this idea of division and fear.
The other thing that might be interesting, I think, is the Texas Senate race, where Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz just neck and neck at this stage. And to think that a Democrat might actually have a chance of winning Texas, that would have been unthinkable. If he were to win, that might be one of the biggest stories of the night, right?
Yeah, everybody keeps talking about him as like a rock star. You know, he's gone around the state. He's gone to every single county in Texas. And, you know, depending on what part of the state you talk to people there, there's some people who feel that maybe he has a chance to win. But, yeah, Beto's opportunity there, especially challenging Ted Cruz, and the fact that they're going neck and neck and that we may be up late into the night trying to figure out exactly who won, that's pretty exciting to watch right now.
What about star power? Taylor Swift came out for the candidate in Tennessee. He lost. You see Oprah Winfrey came out with for Stacey Abrams in Georgia. That one's still up in the air. But you see Obama here. You see Trump there. I mean, what influence did they have in this election?
I think they've played a big role in this. I felt like watching President Obama out there on the campaign trail that it became like this pitting of fear versus hope. It was like hope and change was the president's message. This current president seems to be fear and division. But we're not talking enough about, I think, voter suppression. And I think that's the greatest fear that a lot of Democrats, and tomorrow morning, I think we're going to be talking about, you know, when we look at Georgia and the fact that their Secretary of State is running for governor, and there have been a number of key issues. I mean, he's blamed the Democratic Party for hacking into their computer systems. There's been a large number of people that have been taken off the voter rolls. I think there's a really big issue that what would happen if we got to play this game and it was all fair. I mean, in Texas, you mentioned with Beto O'Rourke, we're looking at a state that has ranked over the last few years 49th and 50th in terms of voter turnout. And there's been a great deal of voter suppression that's there. So it's going to be interesting to see not only these numbers that come in, but what's going to happen when people are talking about, well, I went to the poll, I voted straight ticket, for instance, what we've heard in Texas, but yet I thought by voting straight ticket that was going to be a vote for Beto O'Rourke, but it switched my ticket to Ted Cruz, who wasn't a Democrat. And so across the board, those are the type of things I think we need to pay attention to.
And it's interesting you bring up voter suppression, which has been an issue leading up to today, but also in some states we're seeing problems where the machines are malfunctioning, lots of issues, you know, and going back to the presidential race where they were talking about perhaps Russian interference. It seems like, we're still seeing a lot of issues dating back, of course, to Bush versus Gore and the hanging Chads. When do you think the U.S. is going to get their act together when it comes to elections?
I was going to mention, so it's funny because back in 2000, 2002, I was working on the legislation in the states that led to the Help America Vote Act. And there was a voter bill of rights that was issued. But that is where we started talking about electronic voting machines. And it's funny now that we look almost 20 years later, the fact that we are talking about hacking, we're talking about people who are saying that their votes aren't being counted or machines that aren't working. But also, there's another question, too. I was talking to someone from Maryland today who said, I stood in line for over almost 2 hours to vote because in their voting precinct, there were only 2 voting booths, knowing that there was a large number of people that were voting. We're talking about, look at Florida right now. We look at Georgia. There are people that are still standing in line. The polls closed at 8 o'clock. You know, you would think that in this world that we would have figured out some other ways that voting, either we have it as a national election day, other countries have that we make it that it's mandatory so we can get the numbers up higher, but more so that we make it so that it's easier for people to vote as opposed to making it harder.
Let's talk about a couple of these races that aren't going to get the marquee coverage that some of these other races. Jared Polis, governor candidate in Colorado. He won, first openly gay governor in the United States. You have your first Muslim woman elected in the state of Minnesota. You have a Native American Democrat in Kansas, big red state, winning there. What about these firsts?
Well, the day after President Trump won, I kind of looked at it and thought, okay, this isn't necessarily, as some people thought, a bad thing. I looked at it and said, this is an opportunity for this country to come together. And I think that what we've seen in gains, and the president is great at messaging. And his Make America Great Again slogan, while it may not be a slogan that some that are opposed to his presidency like, in a sense, this country is becoming better. And it's becoming better because we're looking at things outside of what we normally would within our communities. We're being more accepting of people who are gay and lesbian and of color, because if you look at Georgia, Florida, even Maryland, where you have Ben Jealous on running for governor, the complexities of this country have always been difficult from our inception. Nothing ever has happened easy, whether or not it was civil rights or women's suffrage or ending slavery. So we've got to have to struggle to figure out how we find ways to compromise. But we're also going to have to find ways that we get to know one another better. And I think that's really what's happening.
Well, Atiba, it's a pleasure having you in. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you.